Hey there, language enthusiasts. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to get into how languages actually change.
Yeah, not just like new slang, but the deeper stuff, like how grammar shifts over time. It's pretty fascinating.
Right, we're talking about construction grammar. This time sounds kind of technical, but it's really about how language is way more flexible than just a bunch of rules.
Exactly. Think of it like a web, always growing and adapting.
Our main source is this book, Constructionalization and Constructional Changes, which sounds a little intimidating, I'll admit, but it's got some really cool examples, so bear with us. So, this web idea, what's that all about?
Well, instead of fixed rules, language is more like a network of relationships. Each word, each phrase is like a point on that web. And those points, they can move, they can connect in new ways.
Okay, I think I'm getting it. So, how does that actually play out in language change?
Take the word cupboard, for instance. Simple enough.
Yeah, just a place to store stuff.
Exactly. But it used to be cupboard, literally a board for your
Yeah.
cups. Over time, bam, they fused together, meaning expanded new construction.
So it's not just words changing, but how we use them, the connections, that's what morphs. That's so cool. And the book talks about this happening gradually too. We use that for quantities now.
Oh, yeah, it didn't start that way at all. It meant a physical portion of something,
Yeah.
a lot of land like that.
Huh. Shows how subtle these changes can be.
Exactly. It's like evolution happening over generations. These tiny linguistic mutations, they add up. The book calls them constructional changes. Small tweaks, but they can lead to big shifts in meaning, even grammar, down the line.
Wow, yeah, like those how it started versus how it's going memes, but for language.
Exactly. But then you also have these sudden jumps, like new words that just appear, Google as a verb, or acronyms like SUBA, BAM, instant change.
Right, it's like language can be super flexible when it wants to be. Speaking of which, have you heard people using aloda?
Oh yeah, like a load of people are saying that. Definitely an internet age thing.
Exactly. It's not in dictionaries yet, but it's out there, evolving right before our eyes. So, what drives these changes, whether gradual or sudden? Why does language evolve at all?
Well, the book talks about a few things. Sometimes it's just easier pronunciation, right? Or maybe we need to express new ideas. But there's also the social side of things.
Oh, right, like how we use language to fit in or to stand out.
Precisely. Language can be a powerful tool for identity. We use it to signal who we are, who we want to be. And that desire to belong or to be different, it can really shape how language changes.
So we've got these gradual changes, sudden innovations, and then this whole social layer on top. It's wild. It's like every time we speak, we're part of this huge, ever-changing system. But how does it actually work on a brain level? How does a word suddenly take on a new meaning, or we start using a phrase in a totally new way?
Now that's where things get really interesting. The book talks about this process called neo-analysis. Basically, it's like a mental switcheroo that happens without us even realizing it.
Okay, I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more about this mental switcheroo.
It's like those optical illusions, where your brain flips between two different images. Yeah, your brain kind of reinterprets what it's seeing. Neo-analysis is similar, but with language. Those subtle shifts in how we understand things over time.
Okay, so give me an example. How does this mental switcheroo actually work with a word or a phrase?
Let's talk about going to, for future plans.
Right, going to do something.
Originally, it was all about movement, like literally going somewhere. I'm going to the store.
Makes sense.
But then, gradually, people started using it for intentions beyond just physical movement. I'm going to finish this book later, that kind of
Oh,
thing.
interesting. So our brains just rolled with it.
Pretty much. It's neo-analysis in action. The book talks about how constructions have these different dimensions, right? Form, meaning, social context. And neo-analysis is like subtly rewiring how those dimensions connect.
So with going to, the going part became less about actually going.
Exactly. The focus shifted to the intention. It's like a grammatical magic trick happening over centuries.
And as that meaning shifted, the grammar changed too. Going to went from being about movement to being about the future.
Exactly. It's like a chain reaction. But instead of atoms, we're talking words and concepts.
Right. So how do we explain those chain reactions? How does a whole bunch of people just collectively decide that a word or phrase now means something slightly different?
Well, a lot of it comes down to our brain's love of patterns. The book calls it analogical thinking.
Oh, right, like making analogies.
Exactly. We see something new and try to fit it into what we already know. It's how we make sense of the world.
So with going to, did we basically go, huh, this movement phrase kind of works for future plans too?
Exactly. And the more people made that connection, the more it stuck. Eventually, that new meaning overshadowed the original one.
It's amazing how much our brains are doing behind the scenes just with language.
It really is. And it highlights how language change isn't just random. It's driven by these deeper cognitive processes. We're always seeking patterns, even in the way we use language.
Makes sense. We need some consistency to understand each other, but also that flexibility to express new ideas. So we've got gradual changes, these neo-analysis moments, all driven by our need to find patterns. But what about when new words just pop up out of nowhere? Does analogy still play a role?
Absolutely. Some new words are truly unique, but even those often tap into existing patterns, like our brains are hardwired to build on what's already there.
So even when we're being super creative with language, there are still rules, or at least patterns.
Exactly. It's like jazz improvisation. You can go off script, but there's still a structure there, a foundation. The book actually gives an example with the brand name, Xerox.
Okay, how is Xerox an example of this?
Well, at the time, it was a totally made-up word, but think about it. Box, fox, vox, that ox sound.
No, wow. I never noticed that pattern before.
Right. Even though it was new, Xerox kind of already sounded like it belonged in English.
Because of those pre-existing patterns, so it felt familiar even though it was brand new.
Exactly. Our brains love that familiarity, even in new things.
That's so cool. Okay, so even those aha
Hmm.
moments of new words, there's often a method to the madness.
Exactly. And that brings us to a really important distinction. Constructional changes versus constructionalization.
Oh, right. Those sound really similar. Remind me what the difference is again. So
Yeah.
we were talking about constructional changes versus constructionalization. It's like they're different levels of linguistic renovation, right? One's a minor remodel, the other's a brand new addition.
That's a great way to think about it. A constructional change is like fine-tuning, a subtle shift in one specific aspect of a construction. Remember, a lot of. Its meaning started changing first, but grammatically it was still behaving like a partitive, a piece of, a portion of, that kind of thing. That subtle shift, that's a constructional change.
Okay, so the meaning can start drifting even before the grammar catches up. So constructionalization is when the grammar finally gets the memo.
Precisely. Constructionalization is the grand finale, the moment those little tweaks add up to something entirely new, a brand new node in that vast language web we've been discussing. With a lot of, it was when the grammar finally aligned with the meaning and we started treating it as a true quantifier, just like many, or several. It became a whole new way to express quantity.
So constructionalization is like the birth of a new linguistic species. Those subtle changes finally result in something totally unique.
A fantastic analogy. And what's fascinating is that the book argues this process can be incredibly slow, especially for grammatical constructions. Think about how long it took a lot of to fully make that jump from partitive to quantifier centuries. But for lexical constructions, like new words,
It can happen in the blink of an eye, like alauta or ebrary or all those other internet age inventions that seem to pop up overnight.
exactly, it's like, bam, a new word is born, fully formed and ready to integrate. But here's the thing, whether it's a slow evolution or a sudden arrival, the book argues that all constructions, new or old, have these inherent qualities that affect their potential for change. They call them schematicity, productivity, and compositionality.
Okay, those sound a bit like a construction's vital stats. Tell me more about what they mean.
You got it. Think of them as clues to a construction's evolutionary path. Schematicity is essentially how general or subtistic a construction is, like furniture is more schematic than chair, which is more schematic than armchair.
So the more schematic a word is, the broader its category, the more potential offspring it could have. Kind of like a linguistic ancestor with lots of descendants.
Exactly. Then there's productivity, which is all about a construction's ability to create new forms. How easily can we plug new words into a particular pattern?
So the lavalous suffix is highly productive because we can add it to tons of adjectives, happiness, sadness, weirdness. But adding "th," like in truth or with, not so much anymore. We don't make new words with "thuff" that often.
Precisely. And during constructionalization, productivity often skyrockets. Once a lot of became a quantifier, we started using it with a much wider variety of nouns. It became more flexible, more productive.
Got it. It's like the construction got a promotion and a whole lot more freedom. And then there's compositionality, which is how transparent the meaning is, right?
Exactly. With kick the bucket, the meaning is not at all compositional. You can't deduce it from the individual words. You have to learn it as a unit.
Right. And as constructions evolve, they can become less compositional, more idiomatic. Like a lot of We can still sort of make out the literal meanings of lot and of, but the overall sense has shifted. It's become more opaque, less transparent.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes language so fascinating. It's this ever-changing tapestry of meaning, constantly being woven and rewoven with threads of logic and creativity.
It's amazing how much complexity is hidden in plain sight. We use language every day, but rarely stop to think about the forces that shape it, the constant push and pull between innovation and
It
tradition.
is quite remarkable. And that's the beauty of construction grammar. It gives us a framework for understanding how all these pieces fit together, how those tiny tweaks and dramatic innovations all contribute to the grand evolution of language.
It's like we've been given a backstage pass to the world's most elaborate play, where the actors are words, the stage is our collective consciousness, and the script is always being written.
I love that analogy. And the most exciting part is that we, the speakers, are also the playwrights. Every time we communicate, we're adding our own lines, improvising new scenes, and contributing to the evolution of language itself.
That's a powerful thought. It's not just something that happens to us, it's something we actively participate in, shaping how we communicate with each other today and for generations to come.
Precisely. And as we become more aware of these processes, we gain a deeper appreciation for the nuances of language and its incredible capacity for change.
So, for those listening, here's a little challenge. Pay attention to the language you encounter online, to the new words, the slang, the creative uses of grammar. Do you see any constructions that seem to be blurring the lines, shifting their meaning, or becoming more productive? You might just be witnessing constructional change in action.
It's a linguistic laboratory out there. By understanding these principles of construction grammar, we can start to make sense of these changes, to see the patterns and the motivations behind them.
So much to think about. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of construction grammar and language change. It's been an eye-opening journey into the hidden depths of something we often take for granted.
It certainly has. And I hope our listeners come away with a newfound appreciation for the dynamism and creativity of language.
Until next time, keep those linguistic ears perked and your minds open to the ever-evolving symphony of human language.